In the early days of flight, the airplane was little more than a scout, an eye in the sky, watching the battlefield unfold below. But over the course of the 20th century, something extraordinary happened. The United States didn't just build better aircraft, it reimagined what air power could be. From the skies over Europe in World War II, to the jet duels of Korea, to the precision strikes of the Gulf War and beyond, American aviation doctrine evolved not by chance, but by design, shaped by visionaries, tested in combat, and refined through decades of innovation. Today, the way modern nations fight in the air, how they train, deploy, and dominate the skies, owes more to U.S. doctrine than many realize. But how did this transformation happen? What decisions, what strategies, and what turning points allowed the United States to redefine the very nature of air warfare? This is the story of how American thinking took flight and changed the battlefield forever. When the First World War ended in 1918, the airplane had proven itself as a military tool, but its role was still limited. Most nations saw air power as an extension of ground forces, useful for reconnaissance, perhaps for light bombing, but not decisive on its own. In Europe, military thinking remained grounded, literally. Air units were often subordinated to army commands, their missions dictated by ground strategy. But in the United States, a different idea began to take shape. Visionaries like Brigadier General Billy Mitchell believed that air power could be more than support. It could be strategic. He argued that control of the skies could determine the outcome of wars. His ideas were controversial, even radical at the time. In 1925, Mitchell was court-martialed for insubordination after publicly criticizing military leadership for neglecting aviation. Yet his legacy endured. By the time World War II erupted, the United States had embraced a more independent vision of air power. The creation of the Army Air Forces in 1941 marked a turning point. No longer just an auxiliary arm, American air power was becoming a force in its own right. This shift was not just organizational, it was doctrinal. The U.S. began to invest heavily in long-range bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator. The idea was clear: strike deep into enemy territory, disrupt industry, cripple logistics, and break the enemy's will to fight, not by fighting armies, but by dominating the skies. This approach stood in contrast to the German Luftwaffe, which focused on tactical support for ground operations. The U.S. believed in strategic bombing, air power as a war-winning instrument on its own. It was a bold gamble, and it would be tested in the skies over Europe. World War II became the crucible in which American air doctrine was tested and transformed. The United States entered the war with a bold idea that strategic bombing could shorten the conflict, destroy the enemy's capacity to wage war, and perhaps even make ground invasions unnecessary. In Europe, the 8th Air Force took to the skies over Nazi Germany with hundreds of heavy bombers, flying in daylight, in tight formations, without fighter escort at first. Their targets were not just military installations, but factories, rail yards, oil refineries, anything that fed the German war machine. It was a doctrine of precision, but also of persistence. The results were mixed. Bombing accuracy was often poor, especially under heavy flak and fighter attack. Losses were staggering. On some missions, entire bomber groups failed to return. The skies over Europe became a deadly proving ground. But the doctrine evolved. The introduction of long-range escort fighters, like the P-51 Mustang, changed everything. Now, bombers could reach deep into enemy territory with protection. Losses dropped, effectiveness rose. The strategic bombing campaign began to cripple German industry, sap morale, and stretch the Luftwaffe to its limits. Meanwhile, in the Pacific,
the U.S. faced a different challenge and adapted again. The vast distances of the Pacific theater required new thinking. The B-29 Superfortress, with its pressurized cabin and extended range, became the centerpiece of a new strategy: high-altitude bombing of Japanese cities and infrastructure. But Japan's dispersed industry and weather conditions made precision bombing difficult. In response, General Curtis LeMay shifted tactics, embracing low-altitude, nighttime incendiary raids. The firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945 killed more people than the atomic bombings that followed. It was brutal, controversial, but effective. By the end of the war, American air power had proven its strategic value, not just as support, but as a decisive force. The doctrine had matured through fire, loss, and adaptation, and the world had taken notice. As World War II ended, a new kind of conflict emerged, one not defined by open battlefields, but by ideology, deterrence, and the ever-present threat of nuclear war. The Cold War demanded a different kind of air doctrine. The United States no longer sought to win wars quickly through bombing campaigns alone. Instead, it needed to prevent war altogether by projecting overwhelming strength in the skies. At the heart of this strategy was the Strategic Air Command, or SAC. Formed in 1946, SAC became the backbone of America's nuclear deterrent. With fleets of B-47 and later B-52 bombers on constant alert, the U.S. maintained the ability to strike anywhere in the world within hours. These aircraft were not just tools of war, they were instruments of policy. The doctrine was clear: peace through strength. But deterrence was only part of the picture. The Korean War in the early 1950s revealed that conventional air power still mattered. American jets like the F-86 Sabre clashed with Soviet-built MiG-15s in the first large-scale jet-versus-jet combat in history. Air superiority once again proved essential, not just for protecting ground forces, but for shaping the entire course of the conflict. In Vietnam, the limits of doctrine were tested again. Despite overwhelming technological superiority, the U.S. faced a determined enemy using guerrilla tactics and mobile anti-aircraft systems. Strategic bombing campaigns like Operation Rolling Thunder failed to achieve decisive results. The war showed that air power alone could not guarantee victory, but it also highlighted the need for flexibility, precision, and integration with ground and intelligence operations. Throughout the Cold War, the U.S. Air Force continued to evolve. New aircraft like the F-15 Eagle and F-16 Fighting Falcon were designed not just for speed and firepower, but for maneuverability and multi-role capability. Air doctrine shifted toward agility, real-time coordination, and the ability to dominate in both conventional and nuclear scenarios. By the 1980s, the United States had built a layered global air strategy, combining stealth, satellites, electronic warfare, and unmatched pilot training. It was no longer just about flying higher or faster. It was about controlling the entire battle space, from the stratosphere to the radar screen.
In 1991, the world watched in awe as the skies over Iraq lit up with the fire of a new kind of war. Operation Desert Storm was more than a military campaign. It was a demonstration of how far American air doctrine had come. In just 43 days, a coalition led by the United States dismantled one of the largest standing armies in the Middle East, largely through air power. Precision-guided munitions, stealth aircraft like the F-117 Nighthawk, and real-time satellite intelligence allowed U.S. forces to strike with unprecedented accuracy. Bridges, bunkers, radar sites,
Each was targeted with surgical precision, minimizing collateral damage while maximizing strategic effect. This was not the brute force bombing of World War II. It was a doctrine of control, of the air, of the information space, and of the tempo of battle. The success of Desert Storm validated decades of investment in technology, training, and doctrine, but it also set a new standard and new expectations. In the decades that followed, U.S. air power became increasingly reliant on integration. During operations in the Balkans, Afghanistan, and Iraq, American aircraft operated as part of a vast, interconnected system linking satellites, drones, ground forces, and command centers in real time. The rise of unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, added a new dimension. Drones like the MQ-1 Predator and later the MQ-9 Reaper allowed for persistent surveillance and precision strikes without risking pilot lives. They became tools not just of war, but of policy, used in counter-terrorism operations across multiple continents. But with this precision came new challenges. The battlefield was no longer defined by front lines, but by networks, data, and ambiguity. Adversaries adapted, using civilian areas for cover, dispersing assets, and investing in electronic warfare and anti-access systems. In response, the U.S. Air Force continued to refine its doctrine, emphasizing flexibility, speed of decision-making, and dominance across multiple domains: air, space, and now cyberspace. The F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II embodied this shift. Not just stealthy and fast, but digitally integrated, capable of fusing information from across the battlespace and sharing it instantly with allied forces. Air power was no longer just about delivering force. It was about delivering knowledge, coordination, and overwhelming advantage before the enemy could react. For over a century, American air doctrine has evolved from fragile biplanes over the trenches of Europe to global strike capabilities that can reach any point on Earth within hours. It has been shaped by visionaries, hardened by war, and refined by technology. But its core principle has remained constant, that control of the skies is not just an advantage, it is a necessity. Today, that control is being challenged in new ways. Near-peer adversaries are investing heavily in anti-aircraft systems, hypersonic weapons, and space-based surveillance. The skies are more contested than ever. The electromagnetic spectrum, once an invisible backdrop, is now a battlefield of its own. In this new era, American air doctrine is once again adapting. The concept of Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or JADC2, seeks to link every sensor, every shooter, across every domain, land, sea, air, space, and cyber in real time. It's not just about faster jets or stealthier bombers. It's about faster decisions, smarter coordination, and seamless integration. Artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, and quantum computing are no longer science fiction. They are becoming tools of doctrine. But even as the technology changes, the human element remains. The training of American pilots, the discipline of its crews, the ingenuity of its engineers, these are the quiet foundations of air dominance. They are not always seen, but they are always there. And perhaps that is the true legacy of American air doctrine, not just in the aircraft it builds or the missions it flies, but in the way it thinks, in its willingness to question, to adapt, and to lead. From Billy Mitchell's bold predictions to the silent precision of a drone strike, to the invisible web of satellites and sensors that now watch over the globe, the United States has not merely followed the evolution of air warfare, it has defined it. And as the world looks to the skies once more, one question remains. Will the next great leap in air power come from technology alone, or from the doctrine that dares to imagine what comes next?
In the end, air power is not just about altitude or speed, it's about vision. And for over 100 years, the American vision has shaped the skies.